something good happens to them. A promotion, a new relationship, a day that goes surprisingly well. And instead of just enjoying it, their brain immediately starts looking for the problem, the catch, the thing that is about to go wrong. They cannot help it. They have tried. But the moment life gets good, something in gets louder. A quiet voice that says, "This will not last. Day. Something is coming. Do not get too comfortable." If you know that feeling, stay with me. Because most people live this way have been told their whole lives that they are too negative, too difficult to be around. But psychology tells a completely different story. And once you understand what is actually happening inside the mind of someone who always expects the worst, you will never see it as a character flaw again. So let us talk about your brain. Because this is not about personality. It is not about attitude. It starts much deeper than that. Your brain has a built-in system called the negativity bias. It is not a glitch. It is a feature, one that kept your ancestors alive for hundreds of thousands of years. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, uses roughly 2/3 of its neurons specifically to scan for danger, not for opportunity, not for beauty, for danger. Researchers describe it this way. The brain is like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. A bad moment sticks immediately. A good moment has to be held in awareness for at least 12 seconds before it even begins to transfer into long-term memory. This is not weakness. This is ancient engineering. The humans who survived were not the ones who relaxed and enjoyed the view. They were the ones who noticed the threat before it arrived. But here is the problem. That same system, designed for a world of predators and survival, is still running in a world of job interviews and text messages. And for some people, it runs louder than others. Now here is the part that most people never talk about. The negativity bias is universal. Every human brain has it, but not every person lives in a constant state of expecting the worst. So what makes the difference? The answer in most cases is experience, specifically early experience. When a child grows up in an environment where bad things happen unpredictably, the brain adapts. It recalibrates its threat detection system to be permanently on, not because the child is broken, but because in that environment, staying alert was genuinely the safest strategy. A parent whose mood was unpredictable. A home where things could shift without warning. A childhood where good moments were often followed by painful ones. The brain learned, do not trust the calm. Something is probably coming. And the extraordinary thing about this adaptation is how thoroughly it works. By adulthood, it does not feel like fear anymore. It just feels like realism. It feels like being smarter than the people around you who are naively expecting things to be fine. Psychologists call hypervigilance, and it looks from the outside like pessimism, but from the inside it feels like preparation. Here is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Researchers at Penn State University have been studying a specific psychological strategy called defensive pessimism for decades, and what they found runs completely counter to what most people assume. People who use defensive pessimism, who mentally rehearse worst-case scenarios before important events, do not perform worse than optimists. In many studies, they actually perform better, because the anxiety they feel is not paralyzing them. It is fueling them. It is making them prepare harder, think more carefully, and anticipate problems that optimists simply walk into. The student who assumes they will fail the exam studies longer than the one who assumes they will pass. The person who expects the presentation to go wrong rehearses until there are no gaps. The one who imagines the relationship ending is often the one who works hardest to protect it. Expecting the worst in this form is not sabotage. It is a strategy, a specific psychologically documented strategy that anxious people developed, often without knowing it, to manage uncertainty in a world that has not always been predictable. And if any of this resonates with you, if this is the kind of psychology content that actually explains how your mind works, consider subscribing. There is more coming that I think you will not want to miss. It takes 2 seconds. But here is the part that requires honesty, because not all pessimism is defensive, and the line between the two matters. Defensive pessimism is active. The person imagines what could go wrong and then does something with that information. They prepare, they plan, they move. The anxiety becomes fuel. But there is another pattern that psychology identifies. A pattern where the expectation of the worst becomes so automatic, so constant, that it stops producing preparation and starts producing paralysis. This is where the self-fulfilling loop begins. Researchers found a specific cycle that chronic pessimists can fall into. You expect rejection, so you pull back slightly in relationships. The other person feels that distance and responds with confusion or withdrawal. You interpret their withdrawal as confirmation that you were right. Rejection was always coming. And the belief becomes stronger. You expect failure, so you invest less. Because why pour everything into something that is going to fall apart anyway? You invest less, so the outcome is worse. And again, the belief is confirmed. The expectation shapes the behavior. The behavior shapes the outcome. The outcome reinforces the expectation. And the exhausting part of this loop is that the person cited is not wrong. Exactly. Bad things do keep happening. The evidence keeps accumulating. What they cannot see is the degree to which the expectation itself became part of the cause. There is one more layer to this that I want you to sit with. Because some people who always expect the worst are not actually pessimists about the world. They are pessimists about themselves. On the surface, these two things look the same, but underneath, they are completely different. The person who expects bad things from the world is bracing for external threat, but the person who secretly believes that bad things happen specifically because of who they are, that they are somehow the common denominator in every disappointment, that person is carrying something much heavier. Psychologists call this a negative self-schema, a deep, largely unconscious belief that takes root in childhood and says, I am the kind of person things go wrong for, not randomly, specifically, because of something fundamental about me. This belief does not announce itself clearly. It shows up as the voice that says do not get too excited. The quiet bracing is before good news. The inability to fully enjoy something without simultaneously waiting for it to be taken away. And the reason this matters is because the solution is completely different depending on which pattern is actually present. Telling someone with a negative self-schema to just think positively is not just unhelpful. It is the wrong tool entirely. Because the problem was never about thinking. It was about an old belief, formed in a different time, about what kind of person they are. Here is what I want to leave you with. If you are someone who always expects the worst, someone who has been called negative, anxious, too careful, or hard to be around, I want you to hear something clearly. Your brain was not trying to ruin your life. It was trying to protect it. That alarm system that never fully turns off, it was built during a time when staying alert genuinely mattered. The hypervigilance, the bracing, the constant low-level preparation for impact, it was not a personality defect. It was an intelligent response to a world that taught you, early and convincingly, that good things do not always hold. The question is not whether your brain learned this. The question is whether the lesson still applies to the life you are actually living now. Because the world you learned this in, that world is not always the world you are living in today. And the brain that built this system can, slowly and with the right conditions, begin to recalibrate. Not by forcing positivity, not by telling yourself to just look on the bright side, but by accumulating enough evidence, real, lived, repeated evidence, that this moment, at least, is safe. That is not optimism. That is something more honest than that. It is the slow, careful process of updating an old map when the territory has finally changed. And for people who always expected the worst, who built their whole psychology around not being caught off guard, that kind of update might be the bravest thing they ever do. If this video felt like something you have been living without having the words for, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more psychology that actually explains how your mind works, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep going. See you in the next one.